Well, it's a real privilege to be here. I have a lot of respect for your organization, its growth, its innovation. And what I'd like to do today, my goal is to basically extend to you things that I've acquired in terms of knowledge over the many years in the industry in very different capacities, as an agent, as a owner of a major company that we sold. Then I created marketing systems for 4 national brands. Then I was the CEO of Realtor.com, then president of Moves Real Estate Division, overseeing Realtor.com and top producer and so forth, and so on. And so from all of those travels, I've been able to acquire, I think, a good enough perspective that hopefully merits your attention here this morning. But I want to make sure that the comments and the observations that I make are really suitable for the audience. So I'd like to begin by asking a few questions. How many of you right now are actively growing brokerages? May I see your hands? Okay. How many of you also do personal business? Okay, so I'd say 80% of you also are involved in doing personal brokerage. That's good, because everything that I talk about has to do with enhancing both of those. A greater emphasis on building the brokerage, but a secondary emphasis on what you can do personally, and also how you can help your agents create more value in their respective marketplaces. When I talk about value, because it all comes down to creating greater value, both real and perceived by the consumers, I always like to point out that the industry has very little room for improvement when it comes to image. Not so when it comes to value. When it comes to image, we're doing a fantastic job as an industry. Our agents are prodigiously photoshopped, resplendently dressed. Our industry invented personal promotion. We've been writing our own glowing reviews for 50 years. And the parking garages and parking lots across North America are replete with our BMWs, Mercedeses, Lexuses, and a litany of other luxury automobiles. So when it comes to image, there's very little left to do. We've got a great image as an industry, and everybody likes and loves us, but I think you'd agree with me that not everybody respects us. I remember years ago, the Harris poll did a research project where they asked consumers to rate professions in terms of respect, and they gave them 27 choices, and we were 27 out of 27. Normally, before I get to give that statistic, it might still be on the web. It was titled Agent Angst. Typically, before I'm able to finish that statistic, somebody will volunteer. Oh, I know, we're right above used car salespeople. No, we didn't make it that high. Okay? So in terms of value, there's the challenge, because most consumers still perceive a real estate transaction as a fee-inflated event, which they have to subsidize in order to promulgate an inefficiently run industry. So there's a lot of room for improvement, as I said. So how do we improve value for Realty One, for our associates, for our companies, in the minds of the consumer? So that would be my self-assignment here. First of all, it begins with nomenclature. It begins with defining your value. Confucius once said that all wisdom begins by properly naming things, and that if something isn't properly named, kingdoms will fall and dynasties will tumble. Well, as an industry, we do a horrific job of naming things and packaging things, and for good reasons. Because we're one of the only people in the corporate world that doesn't create our own product. We're a conduit to shared inventory. People don't fly into LAX and say, you've got to go to Coldwell Banker. Have you seen the Coldwell Banker patios? How about those Century 21 kitchens? And so we have been denied the opportunity to start with the merchandising stage of real estate. So we started with the product was given to us. And therefore, since the product was given to us, we overlooked merchandising and we began with marketing. But we really begin with selling, okay? So what are the consequences of that in terms of value? Well, in the mid-1800s, the way that somebody would sell a home is that the homeowner would get on the horse and buggy, go down to the general store, and there'd be a list. List your home for sale. And so the homeowner was the de facto listing agent. 150, 200 years later, it seems as though we still haven't evolved from that in terms of definitional purposes. Because what do we call the person who represents the home seller in every state in this country? Would you agree with me we're actually still calling people the listing agent? Okay. Now, do you think that suggests value to the consumer? No, what that suggests is this. My job is done. I have the listing. There's nothing more to do, but I want a nice fee for that. Even the buyer has representational value because there's a buyer agent. But we haven't even figured out as an industry that shouldn't the home seller also definitionally be in a situation where it suggests that somebody's representing them? No, we don't represent home sellers. We represent the listing. We're the listing agent. Now, because we're the listing agent, that infected everything else that we do. For example, what percentage of companies today do you think are actually still teaching their people how to make listing presentations? Do you still hear that terminology? Why don't we train people how to use the rotary phone? Why don't we have workshops on how they can have indoor plumbing? I mean, it's stunning and it's staggering because let me ask you this. What percentage of consumers do you think want to listen to a listing presentation? Try zero. Because a listing presentation is about who? It's about you. It's about you and the company, and consumers have developed antibodies over that approach. And when a realtor says to a homeowner, the single biggest reason you should list with me is because you get me, for many homeowners, that's the most frightening news of the night. And so it's time for the industry, but forget about the industry, we're talking about Realty One. It's time for the industry to evolve from inculcating, teaching, and coaching associates on how to make listing presentations and evolve into where we're presenting marketing proposals. Because would you agree with me that most home sellers would rather have somebody present a marketing proposal than a listing presentation? But a listing presentation is about the past. It's about me. A marketing proposal is about your home in the future. And this isn't just semantical. Oh, what's the difference? This is what Confucius said. Dynasties will tumble and kingdoms will fall because there's not enough perceived value in what we do. And we're very vulnerable as an industry because of that. The next point I'd like to talk about in terms of defining greater value has to do with how are you positioning your company in recruiting. A few points. The industry for years has been obsessed with two words, recruiting and retention. The only people that vie for the attention we give recruiting would be the military, and the only people that would compete with us for our adoration for the word retention would be the prisons. And one of the reasons why there's rampant departures from real estate companies is because the companies are more obsessed with retention than development. And again, I don't think this is a case of semantics. So I think we've got to evolve from recruiting and retention to selection and development. And I want to congratulate you, and I want to congratulate Realty One for making the profoundly important decision to involve Excellium and specifically Debbie DeGroat. Because one thing that I think everybody here can also agree upon is this. Coaches in this country have a profound impact on the thought processes of top producers. And they have a fiduciary responsibility to give people advice that they believe is going to help that client, that agent. That coach does not work for the company. That coach was not retained by Coldwell Banker or Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. So if a coach's loyalty is to that company, as the company is not their client, they're basically violating ethics, in my view, and I think in any objective view. So if a coach believes that an individual might be better off in another type of company, oh, you want to get into the upscale marketplace, and you're with XYZ brand, have you ever considered maybe going to Sotheby's? Oh, you want to get into this. Have you, you're not getting as much, have you ever thought of going to Keller Williams? Do you think that exists? It's rampant, as it ethically should be. Imagine having, as you now have, a person that's going to have the most influence on the thinking of all of your agents, who thinks so much of Realty One that after being the 8th most productive real estate agent in the world, after running Mike Ferry's a lot of his coaching for 12 years, and now being a coaching icon herself, made the concerted effort to encourage, if not insist, that her family leave the 8th largest real estate brokerage in the country, first team, and migrate to Realty One. You could not have a greater validation. You could not feel better about entrusting the career development, outsourced needs, and integrated needs to your people than you're going to get now with Excellium and Debbie. But I want to get now back to the naming convention and how we position things. To me, there's 3 types of real estate brands. There's B2B brands, there's just generic brands, and then there's B2C brands. So for example, a B2B brand would be Keller Williams. A B2B brand would be RE/MAX. RE/MAX started their organizations not because they had an unbelievable epiphany that we want to make life better for consumers. The reason for existence initially for RE/MAX and Keller Williams was they wanted to improve the careers of agents. That was their stated goal, and that's how they were inferred by the industry. Would you agree with that? So that's a B2B brand. A generic brand would be, in my view, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, ERA. These are names that Coldwell Banker, there was a Mr. Coldwell and a Mr. Banker in 1906 in San Francisco. So that company grew. So that's just a brand that grew. Century 21, that started was 2 listings and 2 sales in one, two listings and 1 sale a month. That's all that went into that name in that convention. So those are basic brands who became very, very well respected because of their growth. And Coldwell Banker became even more respected when Realogy and Sundance started buying major companies, of which I was a broker owner of, and they rolled them into NRT. And then there's B2C brands. B2C brands would be a brand like Sotheby's, Berkshire Hathaway. because they're more than a brand. Let me tell you the word they are. This is a very fancy word. It's nothing that I think that anyone here is likely to repeat. But those brands are really, the word is imprimatur. It's like a seal of approval. It's the halo effect. My oldest daughter graduated from Princeton. If you go 30 miles outside of Princeton University, you'll still see Princeton cleaners, Princeton bagels, because those brands can be extended to bring value to other entities. So those are profoundly organized B to C brands. I think so in terms of recruiting, because I'll tell you right now, I just spoke I had the privilege of speaking at the wonderful Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Convention, and they had a video of all of their agents with testimonials. 99.9% of all those testimonials was how great our brand is. I was the president, more as window dressing for a little while of a Sotheby's company, a 15-office firm in New Jersey, after I left Realtor.com and Riz Media. And in that company, it's 100% of the discussion is about the brand. Now, they're going to talk about the brand more, but those are B2C brands. Those are imprimaturs, if I will. I think Realty One has an opportunity to be both. Okay? So, for example, like right now, if somebody were to ask all of you, what's your company slogan? What is it? I don't hear everybody shouting it out. Okay, I don't hear everybody shouting it out. But you have an opportunity, for example, now this isn't rocket science, that if you had every one of your network members underneath their logo with something like keeping consumers number one, and you just had the one as the letters and not the numeral, okay, or the math sign, then that would signal to the consumer that little magic wand, that little stroke of a little subtitle would automatically announce to every single consumer in North America that you are consumer-centric. Does that make sense? By a show of hands, how many of you think that would be a great idea? May I see hands? Okay, that's great. We have it memorialized here. And then here's what I'd do with it. I'd see if there's a way that you could be on the front cover of Riz Media, because there's no way else you're ever going to be on a major, monumentally important magazine with a front cover. And I would have on the front cover, Realty One, keeping consumer number one. And then I would have that on every single office, and I would grow the company based on that, because you'd be explaining to the agents money follows value, and you can't be number one if you don't make the consumer number one. See, that's an inarguable assertion, but we wink at it. And so I think that would have profound consequences. Now, if Kuba wants to do that, I hope at least he'd be a gentleman and send me a little advertising, okay, vig here, just maybe 10% of what it'd have to give an agency. But now it comes down to this. Then it downstreams through your entire culture. Here's how Realty One keep buyers number one. But then you're going to have a name system of the Realty One home buying system. Because right now, if I would ask all of you, what's the name of the system that you have that all of your associates introduce to buyers? There isn't one, is there? There isn't one exact named, definitionally consistent nomenclature that you use for the whole network. Am I right? So in other words, everybody's on their own. But sometimes the worst advice you can give somebody is to tell them to be themselves. And that's what leaders do. So leaders create programs that they can downstream. But then it's got to be customized. For example, what's the name of the Realty ONE system that you use to market homes? What is it? Oh, okay. But see, maybe you should have the Realty ONE customized home marketing system. It'd be so simple to do. Because the word customized basically suggests to all of your top producers that we don't see you as a robot, that we're going to stultify your creativity and impose upon you a top-down corporate order. So can you live with the word customized, that you have the opportunity, if you do virtual tours, throw it in. If you do special photography, throw it in. If you do special catering at the open house for the brokers, which always blows my mind, imagine being in the hospital, lying in the bed and having your doctor on the phone saying to other physicians, would you please come up and see my patient? I'll have a buffet here for you. As if no one would ever professionally have a need to see inventory unless they're being fed. So we're turning the industry into an industry of gastronomic incinerators, okay, just to be able to go see homes in the market. But the point is this. So if you have the Realty ONE customized home marketing system, then that gives the latitude of every agent, so you can't argue with that name. And do you think homeowners think that their home is different? So the word customized to the home seller suggests that we don't think homes are interchangeable widgets. But then if you go there, you've got to educate those in your care. You've got to become a thought leader with them. And you've got to change the paradigm of how the industry has infected them and contaminated their thinking. Allan, what do you mean by that? Well, here's what I mean by that. What percentage of realtors in the country do you think actually still use the word comps? 100%. Is there a homeowner in the world that wants to have an agent come to their home and insult them by beginning by saying, as an example, by the way, folks, I brought some pictures of some comparable children. Do you think there's a difference? Do you actually think there's a difference? Every single home seller in the history of the world that's been told, let's take a look at some comps, or let's take a look at some similar homes, has all said the same thing in their collective protest. But they don't have 5 bedrooms. But they don't have a new kitchen. But they can't walk to the beach. What they're basically saying is that you have just lost the listing because of your callous, robotic mimicry of an industry that is so pitiful when it comes to being consumer-centric that you can't even avoid kicking off our evening by denigrating us. And that's what it's doing. And how could I ever list my home with you if you don't even understand its distinctiveness? How could I ever listen to anything you have to say about price when you actually just had the nerve to compare our home to these other homes, 2 of which were on the market when we bought this one and we hated. The other one, we can't stand the people who live there. And the other 2, you never even went probably to see. And yet, because of your idiotic little training program, okay, you're going to meet us and say, oh, I brought some pictures of some homes, okay, that are like yours, and think they're going to survive that. Okay? Now, Allan, what should you say instead? Here's what you should say, and here's what you should encourage your agents to say. Let's take a look at some properties that buyers will be evaluating at the same time they're evaluating your home. You don't have to keep sticking it to people, humiliating them, and offending them. In fact, my oldest daughter is a clinical psychologist, and she went, the one that went to Princeton, and I said, Ginny, have you done any research on what demotivates people from making decisions? She said, Dad, there actually has been a lot of research. Let me get some to you. And there was like 4 or 5. The first thing is to always make sure you belittle the person. Okay, so can we check that off? The other thing is always make sure you embarrass them in front of others. So that checks that off. Okay? The other thing is that what you try to do is you try to get them to change their thinking. Because 95% of the time, people will never change their thinking. Putting politics aside, it came out on CNN the other night, 98% of people who voted for Trump think it was, I guess, a profoundly wise decision. And I'm not getting political. But the other side would be just as adamant that it was a wrong decision. Would you agree with me? People don't change their thinking. They're embedded, these are embedded beliefs. And there's not a homeowner in the world who thinks their home is like others. Agreed? Our entire industry is based on the premise that your home is like a commodity. And that's how we're going to treat you. But that's how a listing agent thinks. Now, getting back to the Realty One use of the brand in terms of that. So I think you can be both B2B and B2C. I think you can do more to become more B2C. And then in B2B, there might be even things that you can do more to celebrate your B2B-ness. And that would be this. You have, I know in speaking to Debbie, Debbie said, no, I wanted Don, her wonderful husband, to leave First Team and join Realty One because they have a very opportunistic compensation plan that really honors successful people. Now, am I right in saying that basically most or all of you offer that same compensation plan? Is that correct? Yes. What's the name of that plan? Excuse me? What's the name of that plan? Oh, so there's all different names. Do you think it might, when I was with Home Store, in fact, I changed the name of it to Move. When I was with Home Store and Move, I also oversaw a program named Top Producer. I believe that if the name Top Producer didn't exist, they would have done 80% less business. That's how important naming conventions are in terms of that. So maybe you've got to come up with something where it's CompuMore, CompuService something, where you're all reading off the same sheet of music, because until something has a name, it doesn't exist. It's not leverageable. The rest of the world has figured that out. Our industry hasn't. People don't have to go into McDonald's and say, I'd like to have 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, let me think, pickles, cheese, yeah, can you put that on a sesame seed bun? Because merchandisers, not marketers, merchandisers package products. And you can't package products unless it has a name. And I commend you for having one university. I think that's magnificent. That's going to become viral if you leverage it properly. And we're going to get to that in terms of the recruiting language. And so I believe, again, if you put together, and Cuba can send me a little check for this one too, okay? I believe if you put together you definitionally name that which is so instrumental in your recruiting. Is it instrumental in your recruiting? The compensation plan? Is it indispensable? Then why are we the only people in the world who haven't even thought of giving it a name? Because that's not in our DNA. The merchandising gene was never developed or never passed on from our forefathers. Now, it's also because we're not strategic as an industry. And I include myself, all of us. In fact, let me ask you this. How many of you, when you were in high school or college, had a strategy that you were going to enter real estate? May I see your hands? Not one person. Now, do you think if we had 100 or 200 doctors here, at least one had a strategy in college? How about engineers? How about entertainers? How about athletes? Firemen, policewomen? We are the least strategic population known to mankind at the professional level. Now, you've all become more strategic, and we're all more late bloomers, but that's just how it is. Like I remember as a kid, why do I have to learn this language? I'm not going to be living in France. That was the attitude. I wasn't strategic. I never gave one thought until after college what I was going to do with my career. And that's why when I was age 16, the principal of the high school told me I had to bring my parents up to the school on my birthday. I'll never forget it. My 16th birthday, here's how I got to celebrate it. My mother came with me, and the principal said to my mother, Mrs. Dalton, just so you know, not everybody's cut out for high school. And so I was not strategic, and I don't think our industry is strategic. Because if we were more strategic, then these simple strategies of having names for our value is the only way we can really fully leverage our value. Now I want to talk a little bit about positioning the company, merchandising the company. When I moved from Boston to New Jersey, some, I guess, 35 whatever years ago, to join a brokerage, there was 2 offices in northern New Jersey. People couldn't believe I was leaving Boston to New Jersey. They were saying, Allan, are you being forced? And I had been drafted by the Boston Celtics, had a built-in network there. But I remember that when I met with Joe Murphy, the founder of the broker, Joe said, I'll compensate you for doing 2 things. Bringing listings into the company, because I was moving my wife and 3 children into a new environment. And he said, Allan, I'll compensate you for 2 things. Bringing listings into the company and recruiting. And 20 years later, we had 32 offices that we owned. I was the minority owner. And we had 28 that we affiliated. So we grew to like 60 offices over the 20 years. And I became obsessed about recruiting and bringing listings into the company. I went on the listings 2 or 3 a night for 20 years with all of our associates. The homeowners never met me again. I never saw them again. I was just a listing presentation Hessian, mercenary, in every single marketplace, from the very hard-scrabbled city of Jersey City, which has now been enjoying an unbelievable renaissance, to listing President Nixon's home in Saddle River and all the upscale properties, and we were the Sotheby's affiliate. And then in terms of recruiting, I recruited people into our marketing systems. I recruited people into the programs that we had developed for their success. And I want to, first of all, give you the process and the language I used in terms of that. Okay, so these are 7 or 8 things I did over 20 years on a daily basis. I mean, it was like an ATM window how many people were waiting for interviews. And we were very aggressive. And it was probably a mistake, but I basically did all of the interviewing for the whole company. Every manager that sent them to me. And that was my day. I'd go on listings to 10 or 11 at night. I'd sleep till 9 or 10. I'd get in there at 11, and then I'd do the afternoon. Then I go on my listening calls. That's what I did for 20 years in terms of that. Number one, instead of meeting people and saying to them, how's everything going? How do you like where you are? That ploy is dead on arrival, because when you ask an agent in another company, how are they doing? They actually think that you're hoping they're not doing well or they're not happy. Okay, that's what it is. It would be like somebody at a social function going up to somebody's husband and wife saying, so how's married life? So how you like being married? Okay, because maybe that person has nefarious intentions. Am I making sense? It would be like saying to a for sale by owner, have you had many offers? That's like going to a restaurant where no one's eating and saying, are you always this busy here? Because it's basically a put down, and people actually know, in a very perverse way, they actually think that you're hoping that they haven't had many offers. So it'd be like a doctor saying, so how have you been feeling? And you believe the doctor is praying that you've been sick. So I would forget forever the whole idea. So how's everything going over there? Oh, there's a lot of changes. How's the new office? Okay? Because most people do not believe that you are just completely hopeful that they've never been happier. They think that you're looking for an opening. Would you agree with that? So you never want to go there. What do you do instead? Every person I met for 20 years, I always ask them this question. Susan, let me ask you this question. Do you still have an open mind about your real estate future? In 20 years, I never had a person say no to that. It's like a logic check. Are you still open-minded about your real estate future? Everyone will say yes to that. Step number 2. Then great, let's get together, but if we get together, I'd like to do it on one condition. Can we agree to get together on a strictly confidential basis? What percentage of agents do you think want it to be confidential? All of them. Is it better that they have to bring it up, or is it better that you bring it up? You bring it up. You give people comfort. Step number 3, always make sure you know precisely 1 or 2 different opportunities to meet. Because if you ever get caught up where the logistics become confusing, you lose all the momentum. We can either meet here at this or that. And again, it'll be strictly confidential. Number 4, when you sit down with that prospective agent from another company, after all the small talk, what you want to be able to say to them is this. Susan, let me begin by asking you this question. What percentage of your income do you attribute specifically to your company? I asked that to everybody over 20 years. The most common response was a physical response. And I never heard more than 10%. The reason you want to ask that question is the same reason why you don't want people asking your agents that question. Because we are in an industry of rampant egomania. It's very, very difficult for people to give attribution to their company and others. They think it's all about them. That's just how it is. That's just how it's been for many, many years in terms of that. And so when they say 5 or 10%, the reason that question is so seminal is because most people are thinking, what do I have to give to get some people to come over, as opposed to what's keeping them where they are. Because if I can dislodge that, if I can detonate that level of cohesiveness or adherence with their company, then it's going to be smooth sailing. And when I asked that, what percentage of your income do you attribute specifically to your company? As I always like to say, I may not be right, but I'm convinced if I asked that to Don DeGroat, he wouldn't have said 50%, 40%, 30%. He would have seen it more of his own efforts. And so when they say 5%, 10%, or 0, the next step was always this. Then with all due respect, Don, why do you stay? Now, when you ask them why they stay, there was only 4 or 5 typical answers. Number one was always because I like my manager. Number two, I've got too many listings to leave behind and worried about servicing fees and the like. Number three, I've spent too much money in co-branding. Number four, I like the location. And number five, I like the people I work with. Or number six, and trust me, if you go after people with Sotheby's and Berkshire Hathaway, you're going to hear, and I love the brand. You're going to hear that more than you can hear with other B2B companies. You can hear that from a B2C company. So after I have all of these answers, that all collapsed into one response from me over 20 years. It went like this. Susan, then let me ask you this. What's more important to you? The relationship that you have with your manager or the potential to make a lot more money? Without exception, or with very few exceptions, every single person said, well, obviously, to make more money if I can make a lot more money. Now, the reason that's an important step is because if you don't cause them to grant you permission to proceed, then everything you're saying is inelegant and rude, and it's an affront to people. How dare you just categorically say that I should come over to you when you don't even know why I'm staying and you don't have a way to put that in perspective. But once they say, well, obviously, I would do this and give that up, now that invites the conversation. If you don't take that forensic step, you don't arrive at that place. The next step is this. Susan, let's begin with this. What did you make last year? Just ballpark. The reason you have to have that qualifier, ballpark, is that many people are prone to exaggerate because they see an alignment with their compensation and their self-image. So by giving them the latitude to exaggerate, it makes it more likely that they'll join you. Was if you ask, what did you make last year, and they outright lie, they may not want to ever show up again. I'll give you a corollary to this point, and this is how we're not strategic. What percentage over the past 50 years of real estate companies, forget about recently, but over the past 50 years, have actually encouraged their agents to ask people to sign in at open houses? Almost everybody. What percentage of consumers do you think want to sign in at the open house? Nobody. And because they don't want to sign in at the open house, what percentage do you think lie? A good percentage. Do you think there's also a healthy percentage of people who write their name illegibly? So basically what that stupidity around that act results in is this. It makes it almost impossible for that buyer moving forward to ever work with that agent. Because they can't call and say, you know what, I wrote my name down as Allan Douglas, but that was before I saw that backyard. Oh my God, what a beauty. Oh, but I wrote my name down as Allan Douglas, but that's before I got to know you better. I'm really Allan Dalton. I committed fraud. Well, let's get back together. And see, and we do this because we're not strategic. That's why at Nordstrom, at Tiffany's, they don't ask you to sign in. They don't put you through JFK security to see a property. But we do because we're not strategic. And it's the same thing in terms of if you ever ask a person, you have a lot of the data anyway, and you have a sense of what they did. But you want to ask that question, what did you make last year, ballpark? The reason you want to also ask that question is that no matter what the amount was, you've got to find a way to compliment them and praise them. Well, given some of the personal circumstances you shared with me, that's amazing you did that well. Oh, by the way, I hope you realize that you're in the top 2% of all realtors in the country. I hope your family appreciates how hard you have to work to make that happen. Because they're not getting that level of personal love every day in their office, because it just can't be that way. Life isn't that way. There's 100 people in the office, no one's speaking to them on those terms. So this becomes cathartic for them. Oh yeah, well gee, that's nice of you to say. Now, Susan, you said that you made $100,000 last year. And again, that puts you in the top 5% of all realtors here in the county. No small feat, especially 6 years in the business. And especially you can even point out a deficiency in the company. Okay, especially since you're also competing with 100 people. Unbelievable what you're doing. Now, we'd all like to make $1 million a year, Susan, but realistically, what would you like to see yourself make in the next 12 months? And at that point in time, the agent might say, well, I'd like to make 200. To which I would always say, well, let me ask you this, Susan, would you settle for 190? Oh, yeah. Well, then you're not going to make 200. And you need to know it. So now I take on the role of the high priest of compensation. Because it doesn't matter what I do, what I've done, it's all about them. It's just like, believe me, some coach is criticizing LeBron James, some trainer. Some personal trainer is criticizing Tom Brady for eating a candy bar. Okay? It doesn't matter if they can throw a pass or not. And so that's the magic of what coaches do. And the great ones like Debbie DeGroat, even if they've been removed from the marketplace for years, they take on the role of pointing out inconsistencies, problems, but too many broker owners and managers are walking on eggs, and they can't be as forthright, and people are craving for that. Or there's so many people, you're looking more at the collective volume than individual parenthetical results. And so now when I say, well, but then the next point is this, but Susan, if you want to go from $100,000 to $200,000, you don't need to change companies. Aren't there agents with Coldwell Banker right now making $200,000? Oh yeah. Well then, why would you have to change? You don't have to change companies. Now let's stop right there. Do you think Susan expects to hear that? No. She thinks I'm going to be at the ridiculous level where much of the industry has been for decades, that I'm going to whip out a little brochure, discover the difference. And unsurprisingly, guess who has all the boxes checked off affirmatively? My company. And guess whose company doesn't have all the boxes checked off? Your company. Because I'm here to put you down. I'm here to put your company down. Because that's the way I function here. You get it? No, so this isn't about the company. This is basically honoring their company. It's honoring the company by being honest. Can agents make $200,000 at Coldwell Banker? Can they make it at Keller Williams? So why would we ever be telling people that they should leave their company? But then it goes to the next step. No, Susan, if you want to go from $100,000 to $200,000, you don't need to change companies. You need to change Susan. Susan, would you agree with that? Every person agree with that. I haven't said a word about my company. I haven't said a word about my office. It's 100% focused on Susan. Now, at that point in time, Susan might say, well, look, you've got a lot of agents who are making $200,000. You're absolutely correct, Susan, but they're not you. It all comes back to this individual. You can't escape the logic of this. Just like when I used to do career nights, I do two things. I'd always have the most negative top producers of the company speak, because that would keep them in the fold for another couple of years. Getting up there saying how much they love the company, how much they love Joe, how much they love Allan for 2 years. Okay, that would check them off for 2 years. And the other thing is this. And by the way, that's another reason you should do a survey. And we have, through Debbie and Excellium, a survey for you. I once took a month, put this very comprehensive survey. It's included in a lot of the stuff. In fact, I used to sell it to companies for $25,000. It took me months to develop. It's not your typical survey. There's like dozens of questions, but the questions are so real estate specific and in depth. It's like, what do you think of office meetings? And there's 15 different responses. They're not being asked that. So when you do a survey of your people, it does a few things. Number one, it memorializes that you respect and care about them. Number two, it converts the inevitable negativity that surfaces at the water cooler and throughout their lives, and it funnels and channels it into a formal, professional way, and it actually reduces 95% of the criticism, because a lot of the criticism is based on the fact that they feel they're being overlooked, or we're growing so fast, I don't think John gets us anymore. We're not the company we used to be. And so they need a vehicle to be able to express, but then I also put questions in there. Why do you think Realty One is the fastest growing real estate organization in the country? You need to force them to articulate and to exteriorize their positivity. But then I also have a question, and it goes like this. In 10,000 words or less, what should we be doing at Realty One that we're not? They drop their pens. They give up. It exhausts them. They no longer want to take you on. They don't think you're vulnerable anymore. You open yourself up. And they also say, oh my God, is this all that's involved in management? I want no part of this. Because you're IBMing them to death. Okay, you're coming at them as if you're from the Google Human Resources Division. It blows their minds. Okay, so now if you want to go from $100,000 to $200,000, you don't have to change companies. You have to change Susan. So now let's try to determine which company can do the best job of helping you change. Are you open-minded to that? Okay. Now, then I had a little 10-question survey, a little snapshot. Please rate yourself from 1 to 5 in terms of prospecting, selling skills, networking, okay, technology. Now, I know that in talking to Debbie, she's always praising Kuba, a great leader and founder and a real visionary. I know Lou, from his extensive credibility in the industry. Burke is a house of fire in terms of what he's doing for you. Mike is bringing a lot of systems and structure. Danielle, fantastic event and everything that she does for the company. And of course, Tara working with Debbie. So you've got a very talented, cohesive, mutually respectful team in terms of that. And so in terms of when you're saying to the person, you've got to change from 100 to 2,000, and you get to all the systems, when they say if Susan says, well, I'd give myself a 2 as a prospector, I would then say in that interview, Susan, just so you know, if you're going to go from $100,000 to $200,000, you can't say it as a 2 as a prospector. Now here's the challenge that we have, Susan. Susan, the challenge we have is this. Your excellent breeding may actually be an impediment to conventional prospecting. Let me repeat that. Susan, your excellent breeding may actually serve as an impediment to some of the hardcore prospecting. I just don't see you knocking on doors. I don't see you calling strangers. Okay? Oh, Allan, thank you. Yeah, I just wouldn't do it. Well, that's why, and this is where Mike's role comes in, that's why we have the Realty One Boom. You have to apply your technology, your contact management systems, your marketing materials into a Realty One lifecycle methodology package delivery system that solves that need. Because this whole thing is matching your solutions with Susan's weaknesses and strengths and aspirations. So it has nothing to do with the company. It has to do with the solutions that the company has provided. And then it can be this. And by the way, and one of the ways that we make sure that the consumer is always won is how we engage them through our content. Okay? And so in other words, it all has to be integrated. And you've got to become an evangelist. You've got to live this. Now, on the selling skills, I agree with you. I know you. I would put a 5 for you as well. It's just that you're not up in front of enough people. Your problem isn't when you go on the listing. They all say this. Your problem isn't when you get the listing appointment. You convert almost everybody. Yes, they're friends and neighbors and referrals. Your challenge is that we've got to get you more listing appointments. Would you agree with that? Now, here's something else you're going to do. You need to have a forensic approach to your marketplace. Years ago, I took a CRB course about 30 years ago, and I think the late and great Howard Brinton taught it. And we talked about having the map on the wall, a blue pin for where all of your sales are happening on your geographical area, a green pin for where you're getting your listings, and a red pin for where your agents live. Now, let me tell you why this exercise is important. It goes to defining the opportunity. And then I'll get back to the recruiting and closing this. When I was in brokerage for those 20 years, and again, we grew our company to 32 offices, and I actually created every national marketing system for Better Homes and Gardens. And the only reason I say that is because when I visited other Better Homes and Gardens companies in California, like Fox and Cascadon up in the Bay Area, it used to always intrigue me, why do their top producers make 2 and 3 times as much money as our top producers? Not only our top producers, Wykett's top producers, Slott's top producers. Why is that? Is it because of the average sales price? No, ours in many cases was higher. Was it because of mobility profile, how often people moved? No, there was 6 every 7 years. Thank God if you're in California, where people move every 7 or 8 years, because if you had a brokerage right now in Arkansas, I think people move there every 27 years. Okay? And so I would have on the, so in other words, and back then, there was commission split disparity, but that's all over. And when you go to the conventions, the top producers are more likely to come from California than the Northeast. Here's why. Here's why, okay? Because in California, there are 71 towns with more than 100,000 people. The average sales price in California, last time I checked, was $814,000. Guess how many towns in New Jersey or cities have more than 100,000? 3. Guess how many in Connecticut? 1 or 2, if that. 1. How many are in Delaware? None. Now, you could be in Vermont if you wanted to work in the capital, Montpelier rather, but there's one problem. There's only 8,400 people who live there. So there's no way, with all due respect to Debbie DeGroat, that Debbie DeGroat would have been 8th in the world if she lived in Montpelier. Because if she sold every single home in the city, it wouldn't have reached what she had. Average price in terms of that. I don't think as managers, as brokers or leaders, we speak enough about addressable markets. I don't think we've done the research and the due diligence to basically juxtapose the demographic opportunity for your people against their present circumstances. For example, right now you're with a company that has 130 agents. We have 45, we have 34, we have 60. In fact, how many of you compete against a company that has more agents in the local market than you do? May I see your hands? Basically everybody. That has to be one of your single greatest selling points. Am I making sense? But you've got to be able to spell that out statistically and demographically. You've got to basically identify, you should be, before you meet with that agent you're looking to recruit, you should have done your own map study, and you should present to them, I have a pin here where you're getting all of your listings, and I have your average sales price. We have to increase both. But then that puts pressure on Realty One. You have to have people, you have to have programs that address these unmet needs. For example, does each of your companies have a luxury home division? Yes or no? No. You're at a disadvantage then if you're trying to recruit somebody that's considering Sotheby's, Berkshire Hathaway's, Elegant Homes at Better Homes and Gardens, or previews with Coldwell Banker. You got to get your act together with this. You need to have the Realty One luxury home system, marketing system. I used to call for sale by owners, and here's how I used to start my for sale by owner call. Hi, this is Allan Dalton. I'm calling from the Murphy Realty for sale by owner division. How are you doing tonight? Oh my God, you have a division? Oh yeah, that's how important for sale by owners are to us. We have a division for you. And the thing is this, because don't you think if one of your agents called an expired listing home seller and they said, hi, I'm calling, and it was an upscale home, hi, I'm calling from the Realty ONE Luxury Home Marketing Division. Would that give them a little bit of an edge? Then you're depriving them of an opportunity to make more money because of what I've been saying. Because you have been perhaps super hyper vigilant on the commission construct and not as vigilant in terms of the B2C and the packaging and the merchandising of goods and services. But that can be done in 2 weeks. It's just that the industry just doesn't think this way. And so you have the luxury home division. You have to have a system for every single thing, and then that creates the culture. And that also helps you recruit companies by going over, because you can ask them the same question I'm asking you. But if you get that map and you show a person there's 2,000 listings, you got 10, why didn't 1,990 people list with you? We've got to solve that problem. See? And then you've got to be able to show, now the other thing is this, because my company, Joe Murphy and my company, we were competing against a company called Weichert. And Weichert 30 years ago had 114 offices in a 60-mile radius. So there'd be like 5 first teams 30 years ago in a 60-mile radius. How do we compete against them? We can't open up all these other offices. So starting 30 years ago, without exception, no one ever referred to any of our offices other than referring it to as a regional sales and marketing center. Because if you still have companies where you're allowing people to call your office the Huntington Beach office versus the Huntington Beach Regional Sales and Marketing Center, then you're basically saying that we can't go into Newport Beach, we can't go into Laguna, we can't go into Orange, we can't go into Anaheim, because we have definitionally confined our operation to the arbitrary borders, okay, from a real estate perspective that the town has given us. And when you tell people, when you get everybody to understand that they're working out of a regional sales and marketing center, this also will help ameliorate the challenge going forward of the excessive money that it takes to bring on more brick and mortar. Because we're in obviously a more mobile society, and you can't have that albatross of having to have an office in every single community, because that's the paradigm. Now that was Weichert's paradigm, and that was Schlott's paradigm. And so, for example, we had in one MLS that had 13 towns, we had 11 offices. And in one town, we had 2 offices, and the population was 5,000 people. But we did that because the town was only zoned for 2 commercial buildings, and we didn't want anyone else in there. So we weren't that stupid. But the point is this. So you have to give an address. You've got to talk to agents about their addressable marketplace. The other thing that I encourage you to do is that you should be putting together, and I know Debbie can work with this with you on this, the Realty ONE $100,000 compensation plan, the $200,000. Because now what you're taking is that you're taking both the opportunity and you're integrating it with the commission splits. Does that make sense? Because now you have a true compensation plan integrated with an opportunity plan. And then you can have Debbie's team coaching people to what they have agreed to do. And no one's doing anything like that. The other thing that I'd say that we have to take a look at is the whole issue of niche marketing. A lot of careers have also been stymied or stultified because of the narrow-minded thinking of our leaders in terms of this. Somebody joins a real estate company, and the broker says to them, well, put together your top 200 list of people that you know. So they dutifully put that together. They come back, and then the broker or the manager says to them, oh, look at this. You belong to the Greek Orthodox Church. There's a natural market for you. Do you think that still exists? Right? That's almost the reason the Pearson's going to not be in the business in a year. Because that niche doesn't scale. There's tens of thousands of realtors who proclaim themselves as the condo king, the condo specialist, that are out of the business. Because they fell prey to segmentation as opposed to desegmentation. And desegmentation is the way the world works, is that where people look at a large swath of consumer commonality. Like, how many homeowners, how many homes in Huntington Beach would Don not want to list? Very few. How many homes in Newport Beach? How many homes in any town? So why are we fragmenting and fracturing the marketplace? As opposed to encouraging people and encouraging companies to develop goods and services that effectively respond to unmet needs in the marketplace, and then training and coaching people on how to deliver these services on a larger territory, and to emancipate them from a situation where right now they met the enemy and it's them because their offices are overpopulated in terms of that. So again, I don't think that enough managers or brokers put that much of forensic thought into preparing to have somebody change their career based on the way we operate as an industry. I mean, we're an industry where brokers would actually put in a newspaper this announcement: so-and-so just completed quick start. Now imagine getting on the airplane to go home and having the pilot say, sit back and relax, I just completed quick start. See, that's not a public announcement. That's a public warning. That's basically saying, that's basically alerting the marketplace, by all means, avoid our least experienced agent. But can you imagine brokers actually doing that? But we had also brokers that would have signs in their offices. Listings needed. Okay? Imagine hospitals, patients needed. Cemeteries, people needed. Law firms, lawyers needed. But do you agree that real estate companies actually would do that? But then again, we're an industry where we actually taught people that when a consumer approaches you and asks of you, how's the market? You should either say it's unbelievable. Did you ever hear that one? It's unbelievable. Or it's great. Or how about this one? I've never been busier. Or the killer. Or all I need is a few more listings. As if the consumer thinks, well, here, I've got 5 for you. So I didn't know there was a drought. And so the point is this, but would you agree with me that we actually have an industry that people would respond to consumers that way? Now, when somebody says the market's unbelievable, do you think that basically reveals a master analytical mind at work? I mean, why would we ever think that people can live without us? Look at the insight we're bringing. How's the market? It's unbelievable. It's great. Now, the great Tommy Hopkins introduced unbelievable, and the whole premise was this. Well, the homes are going up and down, you're covered. Because it was treated as an objection. But it wasn't. That's what wasn't going on. What that basically did is it prevented millions of conversations about real estate. You couldn't have come up with a greater conversation killer or room clearer than to ask an agent, how's the market, and actually have them say it's unbelievable. They're basically saying, can we please switch the subject? I'm so uncomfortable getting into detail That's why I have this ridiculously asinine, stupid response to get you off my back. It's a conversation killer. So now, getting back to that whole exercise of the addressable market in terms of that, I think if you had the Realty One 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, so forth, business plan. Now I want to get to the last point in terms of the recruiting language. When I used to cause people to want to join, oftentimes on a Friday, they'd say, Alan, I'm all set. I've just got to tell my broker. I'm going to tell the manager. I'll be here. Give me a little time Monday. I've got to return my key in the morning. I'll be here at noon. Then I get a call on Monday morning. Mr. Dalton, Allan, boy, I hated to have to call up, and I couldn't sleep all weekend. I've decided I'm going to stay. Okay, well, apparently you have some reason. Ask what it is. Oh, yeah, the broker, my manager, they're going to sweeten the deal. And I've decided, I've made a commitment, I'm going to give it another year. So does that ever happen to you? So what I created 30 years ago was what I call disengagement letters. I wrote 15 to 20 letters that they could select, that they would send in advance of their meeting, like, Dear, to say the broker was done. I actually call them real estate Dear John letters. Dear John, I want to thank you for the wonderful 2 years you've given me, but I've made an irreversible, irrevocable decision to leave the company. I can't be swayed differently, and I know you've made a lot of career changes yourself and how much you respect the need at times. But there were 15 of that caliber. Some were a little bit more pointed, like, Dear Bob, while you've been out recruiting other agents, other companies have been recruiting me, and I'm leaving. Okay? So, and some love that. That's it. That's exactly it. They don't care about us. So that miraculously cut down on that phenomenon. And I would have them role play for like 20 or 30 minutes what they were going to say. Now, why are you going to say, when your spouse asks you, why are you leaving? Well, because I think Realty One just seems like a great place. No, you're not joining us if that's your reason. I'm not letting you. I don't want you. If that's your reason, I don't want you. I take 20 minutes because they've got the best contact management system, because they've given me the biggest marketplace, because they're a regional office, because they put the consumer as one. Okay, and the only way we can be number one is by giving the consumer, making sure the consumer is number one. So I would spend 20 or 30 minutes, because I'd gladly take another hour to have a person who's going to generate so much income over the next 12 months, wouldn't you? So I'll take 30 minutes because they need to be prepared for how they're going to defend their decision. Because I can't afford for them to go, well, I've never heard of that company. Well, gee, I don't see their TV commercials. Why are you leaving? What's going on here? And then the other thing, the biggest reason, honey, is this. CompuMore. Their CompuMore system. Do you like that idea, by the way? Do you want to make it easier for them to refer to the conversation? Or do they have to go through every single person, the layers, the caps? Is that what you're trying to make them do? Or do you want to keep it simple for them? What do you think? Keep it simple? How many of you like that whole idea of CompuMore? You like that idea of having a name for the conversation? Do you like that? Have a name for it. Okay. Now, there wasn't a great mandate, but that's fine. Now, in closing, I want to cover a few other points here. How many of you would like to dramatically increase the effectiveness of your people securing listings when they meet with home sellers? May I see your hands? Okay, I want to make sure. I usually don't play this, Simon Says game, but I need to have this feedback. Okay, and I don't have a PowerPoint either. But for those of you that like a lot of visuals, just so you know, there's actually a movie theater in the hotel if you want to see visuals. I went there last night at 10:30 and I saw a movie. So just so you know, did you know there's a movie theater? They have like 10 screens. Okay, so I know some of you love visuals, so I just wanted you to know that. So how do we help you make sure that your agents never lose listings when they have the appointment? Well, first of all, you have to ask yourself this question. What would be the single biggest reason that they'll lose a listing. The single biggest reason they'll lose a listing has to do with price. But it has nothing to do with the pricing recommendation. It has the way in which they present it. Because this is the greatest example of a non-strategic industry. Here's how the real estate industry has been trained, because our brain power has been taken over by software companies. So when people go to the conventions and they go up and down doing the trick-or-treating ritual up and down the booths, there's software program after software program, and now have there been software programs that deal with CMAs? Are there? And guess what? That's taken over the brain power of our industry. We have been subsumed by people who seem to be more intelligent than our industry. Now, in the information age, it's been said that data and information are at the lowest level, and knowledge and wisdom are at the highest level. We're an industry of data mongers right now, and we're completely ineffective when it comes to pricing. How so? Here's how the industry right now covers the subject. Well, folks, I went into the computer. This column here, these would be homes on the market. Now, what I'm saying, you might think that sounds pretty logical and good. I'm saying this sarcastically. I'm saying this in a mocking fashion. Well, folks, I went into the computer. This column here, these are homes on the market. That would be your competition, okay? This column here is days on the market. This is list to sales price. This is absorption rate information, okay? And I also have some, and these are expired, we call them expired listings, homes that are no longer on the market. And I also have some macro and micro little information here economically for you. Do you think agents are approaching it that way? Now, that colossal, catastrophic mistake that's destroying agents' ability to get listings left and right, they'll end up with somebody, but on the spot, is all because of an absence of strategic thinking. Because we missed the strategic step. We went to a tactical step. So let's do strategic thinking on how agents should present pricing. And all of you, you said you're active yourselves. Number one, what percentage of realtors, when it comes to their own home, overprice their own listing? 100%, okay. What percentage of realtors have access to all the data? 100%. What does that tell you about the value of the data? It's completely worthless. Because the people who have the most access to the data completely ignore it. Would you agree with that? So the data is a joke. It's an absolute joke. Now, the next strategic question is this. What percentage of home sellers do you think love to see the data? Are so thrilled at what the numbers are revealing? Do you think they love that? Oh, this is great. We didn't think, oh my God, this is wonderful. Do you think that's the reaction? No. So therefore, how do you present pricing? Well, here's what we should do. First of all, in terms of the listing presentation, it's tied into the listing presentation. We can still have agents going on a listing presentation saying to home sellers, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, my company, and what we'll do to market your home. We don't want to say to home sellers, how are you going to go about selecting an agent? Which is the same as basically saying, I can't get to your needs until we first resolve my uncertainties, okay? How are you going to go through the process of selecting one of us? You wouldn't even have a landscaper that would come to your home and say, how are you going to select the landscaper? Do you think you'll ever meet a doctor that will ever say, how are you going to select a doctor? Do you think there's an attorney in the history of the world that's ever said to a prospective client, how are you going to go about selecting an attorney? Do you think they do that? Do you? Do you think we do that? Why do we do that? Because we're not strategic. Because we bring in our competitive concerns and we contaminate the homeowner, because that's one of the 5 ways to demotivate, is make sure that you always reveal that it's all about preoccupation with yourself. We can never get off of that, all right? So here's how I suggest that you and all of your associates begin their marketing proposal. Folks, I've brought this evening some marketing strategies as well as some pricing strategies. Would you like to begin first with the pricing strategies and then move on to the marketing strategies? Or would you rather begin with the marketing strategies and then move on to the pricing strategies. Do you see any downside with that? Do you think realtors have ever started with the marketing and had the homeowner say, can we get the price? How often do you think that's happened? Thousands of times? The agent just lost the listing because we're not strategic. Then if they say pricing, I want them to say this. Well, folks, we've made a science out of pricing properties here in California, Nevada, Oklahoma, or wherever, and we offer our clients 3 distinct pricing strategies. Some of our clients want to price their home based on the CMA or the appraisal, and thankfully they do that for them because especially if they've got time pressure, that more likely means that their home will appraise out. They're also preparing for a marketplace that's increasingly statistically informed, both agents and buyers. So that's strategy number 1. You get that, folks? Okay, great. Strategy number 2, some of our clients actually want to price their property a little lower than the market data suggests because they want to create competition, or they've got time pressure, or they're not just moving for economic reasons, they're also moving for lifestyle reasons. And the third reason, they want to be near the grandkids, and the third reason, the third strategy that some of our clients select is they want to basically use what we call the retail strategy. And the retail strategy, I have it right now, and the retail strategy is basically where they want to put a little bit of a cushion because they anticipate that buyers are going to want to negotiate. So of these 3 different strategies, which of the strategies seems the most suitable for you at this time? Now, what that does is that it tenderizes the home seller. That's before you get to the data. Now, now even if you didn't introduce that, what percentage of homeowners on their own do you think take strategy number 3 over the last 100 years? 95, 99%. So you're going with the flow because you're never going to change that. But you're not going to change 1 penny of where you're going to put the listing. You still control that. But you're tenderizing the home seller. It's too callous and it's too blunt to meet with home sellers as if you're an advocate for your research and you're dealing at the data level as opposed to the knowledge and wisdom level, okay? How many of you think that might help you? May I see your hands? That's great. That's nice to see because it will. It will dramatically alter the dynamics. Now, here's the other thing that we should recognize as an industry. Several years ago, I received a call from investment bankers from Australia. They said, can we fly you to the Plaza Hotel in New York? Because we're looking to make a major purchase in the real estate portal. I can disclose this now. They were the people who spent $1 billion to buy Move. So they paid me a lot of money to spend a day. They put me up in a suite there, flew me first class from California. I spent a day with them as the former CEO of Realtor.com. Here's the first question they asked me as we opened the proceedings. Allan, how much longer do you think that realtors are going to be able to get away with overcharging consumers? Because in Australia, where they were from, it's always 2% basically. Now, fees are negotiable. There's no set fee. We have to always say that in a room like this. But here's the answer I gave. As long as 2 things continue to prevail, they said, because our investment is predicated on agents subsidizing the site. And if their compensation is in peril, our ROI will suffer immeasurably. Can they continue to command these fees? And I said, yes, as long as 2 things continue to take place. Number 1, we continue to do a magnificent job of overpricing our listings. And number 2, thank God the transactions have become so complicated. Now, it's interesting that the 2 things that we rail against the most, oh, that's overpriced, it's overpriced, it's overpriced, is the only reason we're in business. Because thankfully, real estate is not a commodity. If it were a commodity or a stock, you'd be like a person at E-Trade, because if you sold $1 million worth of stock at E-Trade, guess what your commission would be? $8. How many of you would be willing to sell a $1 million home for $8? Why do you think you deserve more? You deserve more because if there was 50 different realtors, there's 50 different prices. If there were 3 different appraisers, there'd be 3 different prices. You are paid because you don't just sell more homes, you've got to sell homes for more. And that's going from a listing agent to a marketing realtor in terms of that. But we've dumbed it down over the years. We still have an industry that if you ask people, what's the biggest reason, and I'll end right to the second. When you ask people, what's the biggest reason a home doesn't sell, you still have a large percentage of realtors that will actually say it's because of its price. And that destroys all realtor value. There's only one reason why a home doesn't sell, and that's because of marketing. Because price is part of marketing. Because if the only reason a home doesn't sell is because of price, then the only reason a home does sell is because of price, and we're basically going out as overpaid appraisers, gouging people. We have to show more value. We have to disrupt the listing side disruptors. We've already given up the first point of contact with buyers. 20 years ago, everyone was talking about disintermediation. We weren't disintermediated. We were disrupted parenthetically on one side. The first point of contact is now the domain of the real estate portals. Would you agree with that? But that hasn't been onerous. That ameliorated the problem that brokers had of classified advertising budgets. It allowed teams to emerge because prior to the web, a team leader, the listing rainmaker, couldn't control all the leads. The web made it possible for those leads to go to the listing rainmaker, thus they had to hire buyer agents. So the web and Web 1.0, Web 2.0, the listing side, the buy side disruption reduced advertising and allowed teams to merge, and it made us look professional. But the only place these portals can go now to further monetize their proposition is the listing side. They're going to go after the listing side with hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're going to do it algorithmically. They're not going to be advertising, spouses selling houses, or we're the home team, or let's start packing. Because if you go to a Google search and you put how's the market, the first response is, and it's unbelievable. So the stupidity that we've been able to get away with because we gated the information is now going to be dismissed. And they're going to have very current, contemporaneous, powerful messages to go directly to the listing side. Because the listing side generates the buyers, and the listing side decides the fees. So the best way that you can help agents, listing-oriented agents and teams, is to become more relevant. Excellium has a program that can help you do that. Riz Media has a phenomenal program that can help you do that, because you have to become more marketplace sensitive. The classic definition of marketing is this. You first determine the unmet needs of the marketplace, and then you create the goods and services to effectively respond to those needs. Debbie, myself, and a marketing guru, we spent a year putting together programs. Downsizing with distinction. These are guides, 15 pages, online, offline. How to effectively move up. How to sell your home through a divorce. Everything on short sales. So we have all of this content in brochures. So then when you're interviewing and you're selecting people, you're basically saying to them, 99% of the people didn't list with you. What program do you have for the downsizing? Well, we have the Realty ONE downsizing program we can introduce you to, because now they're prospecting based on relevance. Okay? They're not sending out pumpkins and calendars and refrigerator magnets because that was acceptable fare before listing side disruption was going to be pursued by these companies that are going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. We know who the best realtors are, and we know who will charge the least. And that's going to eviscerate value, and it's going to completely change. It won't be disintermediation, and partially the reason why there won't be disintermediation is, thank God for overpricing. Thank God that people can get paid tens of thousands of dollars to nurture the delusions of home sellers over weeks and months, whereas if we were a commodity, if homes were ever priced to sell, like widgets like beef, barley, corn, stock, IBM, by the minute, billions of dollars, we would never command the fees. We command the fee because for only one reason. Home sellers have a completely different agenda. You want the home to sell, they want it at the highest possible price. Those are in conflict. But that's a conflict that results in the only way we stay viable and get compensation. But that compensation will be significantly eroded if we don't find a way to coach, train, and educate people to get to the consumer before, during, and after the transaction. And to do that, I believe Realty ONE can do even more to better package your value proposition, both in terms of a B2C, okay, keeping consumers as one, or whatever, something of that line, packaging all of the programs that you have, and doing some of these things in terms of doing a better job of addressable market, matching up the opportunity, because you're a brand that is a proactive brand. A lot of agents join brands that are reactive brand. They think by virtue of their brand equity, everything's going to come to them. And that's why I have so much respect for you and your organization, because you're basically rolling up your sleeves and you're focusing on what is most important. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Thank you very much for your kind attention.